What is the cost of winning in college sports? My first memory of associating happiness with lacrosse was when I was in 5th grade. My dad, who himself had been a Division I lacrosse player, put a lacrosse stick in my hands as early as age 5, brought me to our local middle school to practice passing and catching. It was that evening that I achieved 44 catches in a row, and we both reacted like we'd won the lottery. I remember more than anything the way our hands met for a high five and the look of pride in his eyes that told my 11-year-old self, people will love you for this. It was in moments like this that I began to internalize this promise of validation that I believe lacrosse offered me. If you work hard enough, you focus for long enough, and you're willing to sacrifice enough, this is a feeling that you can replicate. And of course I wanted to replicate it. And in fewer words, most people usually just refer to this dynamic as discipline. And we're told from before the time that we can even spell the word that discipline is the key to getting us to where we want to go. Now, what a lot of people leave out of that motivational speech is that there's a lot of emotional challenges inherent in that very pursuit. My first memory of associating sadness with lacrosse would come my freshman year of high school. I'd achieved a dream of making varsity as a freshman, and the excitement wore off very quickly when I realized I was no longer the best. I no longer felt special. I felt confused why I'd ever loved the sport. And I was having one of those days at practice that every student athlete has experienced. And I was just on the verge of tears the entire practice. So I slipped out of a drill under the pretense of going to the bathroom, which I know we've all done, athlete or not, and I sat on our locker room floor just sobbing. And as I sat there, I felt this acute moment of heartbreak because it was in that moment that I realized that promise of validation that I once believed lacrosse offered me had been broken. And it was then that I realized that my love for lacrosse actually came under conditions about my performance. And moments like that one would become commonplace in my lacrosse career, with moments like my 44 catch record, which was a big deal at the time, becoming rare enough that I kept wanting to chase the validation that they gave me. But as I got older and the competition got better, the line of what I considered success in my lacrosse career became evasive. So a baseline of catching the ball 44 times in a row became making elite club teams and going to invitational tournaments, being named first team All-State. The end point of which all seemed to be getting recruited and going to a name brand college lacrosse program. So, after all of those 2-hour commutes to practice for my club team and summer weekends spent on dusty fields in suburban Maryland, traveling to recruiting camps all over the country, all of which constituted a steep investment on the part of my parents, thank you, Mom and Dad, I committed to play Division I lacrosse at Vanderbilt University when I was a junior in high school. And despite the initial excitement that came along with the VU balloons that hung above my bed when I got home that evening, or the inundation of posts and Instagram stories from friends and teammates congratulating me on this milestone, it was soon after this achievement that I felt myself begin to burn out as a lacrosse player. And because at that point in my life, all I knew I was a lacrosse player, I felt myself begin to burn out as a human being. And it was around this time that I began to wonder about what I now know is called athlete identity foreclosure. This refers to one's commitment to the athlete role in the absence of exploration of occupational or ideological alternatives. At 17, I found a lot more resonance with the phrase identity crisis, and this identity crisis catalyzed an eating disorder which gave way to a depression that defined most of my senior year of high school. So despite the fact that I had been named captain for my senior year, which was a lifelong dream of mine, I actually spent most of that year fantasizing about quitting. I wondered about what it would be like to go to normal college, and I thought about all these experiences I could have. Truthfully, I wondered if I quit lacrosse, would my muscles shrink to the size of that of my non-athlete friends, and it all felt so tempting. But at the end of the day, I loved lacrosse. I felt like I was lacrosse. And this idea of quitting was nothing more than the forbidden fruit, something that anyone who has been stifled or diluted by their sport or career has experienced. And so, I went on with the plan, and I began my freshman year of college in August of 2020, which was decidedly one of the worst periods in history to be a freshman on a college campus. And as soon as I got there, it became clear to me that my mental health could not sustain me for that semester. I made the decision with my coaches and my family to return home for the semester to begin eating disorder recovery and therapy. And honestly, at the end of that semester, I was like, I'm good to go. And I got back for my second semester, which was my first season of Division I college lacrosse, and I really thought that I was ready to take it all on. But it was just a few weeks into the season that I began to feel that inescapable pressure come right back. I began to feel frustrated at practice, helpless, overlooked. I went to the bathroom at Vanderbilt and I was crying, so I felt like I was reliving all these difficult moments that I had had growing up. And I went to my coaches about it, and I told them, I said, I want to love this sport. I want to feel the way about this sport that I did when I was 12. And they tried to help me, but then followed a series of unsuccessful attempts to fall back in love with lacrosse, complete with a season-ending injury as I sustained a major concussion in April of 2021. When I think back to my life and my college lacrosse career, I think of inflection points. I think of that concussion. And to me, it's more than you ran into someone's stick at practice. To me, this injury was symbolic of something far more. This injury, to me, symbolized this sport is hurting your mind more than you're giving it credit for, and it's time to take a step back. So as my teammates boarded a flight to the NCAA tournament that year, I would get in my car and I would drive home to New Jersey. And truthfully, when they boarded that flight, a huge part of me thought my lacrosse career was over. And part of me was okay with that. Part of me was so relieved. But this other part of me ached for more. This sport had given me so much, and I felt like I still had more to give back to this sport. And so I spent the rest of that month deliberating on whether or not I wanted to continue playing lacrosse. And cliche as it may sound, a few self-help books later, and a lot of really difficult conversations with people I respect and admire later, I made this decision that I could actually come back to lacrosse with completely new intentions. I could return with this sense of independence, this sense of agency. And I was so excited to return with these new intentions, this new purpose that had nothing to do with performance or statistics or what I did or didn't do on the field. I was going to come back with my two clear intentions. Number one, I wanted to be the most supportive teammate possible. And number two, I wanted to embrace all of the challenges that being a Division I athlete presented. It's not often that you get to experience the schedule or lifestyle of a Division I college athlete, and it's difficult. And I knew I wasn't going to go play professional lacrosse, so I wanted to use all of those challenges to make myself a better daughter, a better friend, a better student, a better partner, a better person. And so I returned, much to the shock of my coaches, and I was really excited to come back at this sport and this institution with new intentions. And so I started telling my story because I felt like over the course of my college career, I had accessed something that so many student athletes feel they spend their college careers deprived of. This ability to look at their coaches, their parents, the fans, and say, enough. I'd rather disappoint you than myself. My body and soul are more important than your experience of me. I am more than what I can do for you. And I started telling that story. And then on March 1st of 2022, my roommate came back to our room with the news that Stanford women's soccer goalkeeper Katie Meyer had died by suicide. And I remember vividly reading the headlines and the articles that night, and I had this pit in my stomach that I had had so many times before, because she wasn't the first. And it's so easy for people who aren't college athletes to read those articles and think it must have been a special case, must have been a crisis. But honestly, student athletes, we read those articles and we say, I get it. We're not all on the brink of crisis, but it's really easy as a student athlete to go through those articles and understand how the factors that we experience day in and day out could overwhelm someone and lead to that kind of crisis. So that night, I sat down and I wrote a letter to college sports, basically saying it could have been any of us. And it was published a month later on April 1st of 2022, and it would go viral within a week of publication, being picked up by Good Morning America and USA Lacrosse magazine. And I got hundreds of messages from student athletes past and present in the days after publication telling me, I don't know how you did it, but you put my experience into words that they could never find. And those messages were lovely. I was happy that it was resonating, but the memory I think back to when I think of the day that this was published was actually a reaction from a staff member at my college. This person sent me a text that said, I can't believe how dark this piece was. This was so difficult to read. I can't believe we didn't know you felt this way. And the part that shocked me the most was the second part, but the first part I felt discouraged by, and then I realized it was okay. It was okay if someone was going to call my piece dark or difficult to read, if it meant that they could grasp the gravity of the subject matter. Although I did kind of think it was like watching a Tarantino film and then being like, this is really scary. Why? Why was it so scary? I was writing about student athletes dying, and of course it was going to be heavy. I didn't want to be writing it any more than she wanted to be reading it. The second part shocked me the most. I can't believe we didn't know you felt this way. I said, whoever said it was just me? This is something that we all experience, some more acutely than others, but we all know it. It's like we have practice, we have lift, there's a little bit of misery mixed in there, we all need some more sleep. And the fact that somebody who had governed the lives of so many student athletes over the years didn't know that showed me how much more work I have to do in this space. But I didn't actually have to prove that to anyone. I didn't have to prove that there was hundreds of people in my Instagram DMs or my email inbox telling me that this is what they had gone through too. Because in the 2 months following the publication of this article, which so many people kindly celebrated for its candid exposition of the disturbing mental health experience that so many student athletes have, 5 student athletes died by suicide. In the course of 2 months, it is clear that there is a mental health crisis of epidemic proportions in college sports, and still we've spent the past 2.5 years having a conversation about the mental health conversation without making tangible change. It's become glaringly clear to student athletes over the past 2 years that nobody is coming to save us. But that shouldn't discourage you, and it doesn't discourage me. It gives me this sense of responsibility to do something. So, how can we make changes? What could we do? We could mandate an increase in funding for behavioral health professionals so that each team has a provider who understands the unique dynamics of that team and that coaching staff. We could require mental health fluency training for coaches and administrators because they need it too. They're the ones working with these student athletes. We could implement a policy that would protect a portion of a student athlete's scholarship in the event that they decide to step away from their sport for mental health reasons, so as to minimize the financial pressure in that already difficult decision. And I'm not the only one who cares. I'm not the only one trying to do something. In February 2023, I was invited to DC to lobby for a bill called the TEAMS Act, targeting emotional and mental stability for student athletes in particular. This bill would expand access to a federal grant that would provide funding for mental health care services, peer-to-peer counseling, 24/7 crisis lines, and training so as to improve the mental health landscape among student athletes and prevent suicide. And that day on Capitol Hill, whether it was somebody curious about what we were up to on the street or a congressperson that you've seen on TV, everyone that we spoke to had a story about a student athlete they knew who had endured the mental health challenges inherent in this experience. And everyone cared. And as a nation that has found community in sport for centuries, It is in everyone's best interest to prioritize the well-being of student athletes so that sport can continue to be an agent for connection rather than devastation. So I ask you to hear me when I say this: there are no college sports without the athletes. There's no March Madness bracket without the men and women who endure the onslaught of criticism coming from people who can't even make a free throw. There is no College World Series without the student athletes who have lost sleep and missed class to get to where they are. There's no college football, there's no tailgates without those players who are putting their mental and physical health on the line day in and day out to entertain a nation. And when you take the time to look past all of the gear drops and the ESPN features and the confetti-filled celebrations, you realize that student athletes are among the most vulnerable populations on college campuses to mental health crises. So I'm standing here like so many people have stood on stages like this one before me, and I'm telling you, we are not going to achieve anything without discipline. Discipline to consistently behave in a way that is conducive to the development of the athletes we work with as coaches. Discipline to pressure lawmakers and collegiate institutions to codify the protection of student athletes into policy. To acknowledge that it shouldn't take having to cancel practice so that your players can attend a teammate's funeral in order for you to change the way that you do things. Discipline to question whether the changes being made are productive or if they are performative. Discipline to be the parent who makes certain their child knows that their worth is inherent and their performance in a sport will never be an indicator of how much they matter in this world. That people will love them for who they are and not what they do. The discipline to put the human before the student and the athlete, so that, as Candace Williams famously said, we don't lose all three. Thank you.